Good evening, everyone. I'm Professor Barlo Dermagrdician of the Armenian Studies program at Fresno State. I would like to welcome you all to our first presentation in the fall 2020 lecture series of the Armenian Studies program. Tonight's lecture is co-sponsored by the Armenian Studies program and is supported by the Leon S. Peters Foundation. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the program will not be holding any face-to-face presentations for the fall semester at Fresno State. So all of our events will be on Zoom and through the webinars. And today we're going to take a look at a brief slideshow to look at some of the upcoming events in the Armenian Studies program. And then when we come back, I will be introducing our guest speaker. So we have a lot of really exciting events coming up at the Armenian Studies program, and you can always follow us on our Facebook page or at our website at fresnostate.edu/Armenian Studies to see all of our upcoming events. It's my great pleasure today to introduce our special guest, Dr. Christina Maranci. She is the Arthur Dadian and Ara Oztemel Professor of Armenian Art and Architecture at Tufts University. And she is also the chair of the Department of Art History at Tufts University. She graduated from Princeton University with a dissertation on medieval Armenian architecture in historiography, Joseph Stragowski and his legacy. She's also the author of 2 recent books, The Art of Armenia, A Critical Art History of Ancient and Medieval Armenia, and also Vigilant Powers, 3 Churches of Early Medieval Armenia. She's also published numerous essays, articles on Armenian art and architecture. Tonight, I'm looking forward to her presentation because it's on the Ani Cathedral, its sculpture, and its inscriptions revisited. And Ani Cathedral is, in the imagination of not only the Armenians, but the world, one of the most interesting historical monuments. And tonight, Dr. Maranci will be giving her new views on some of the latest research that she has been conducting at the Cathedral of Ani. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Christina Maranci. Dr. Maranci?
Thank you so much, Barlo. It's an honor to be invited to give a lecture for the Armenian Studies program at Fresno State. It's a wonderful program, and you know, with all the luminaries there, I'm very honored. So thank you to you and to everyone there. It's a little bit later here. It's 10 p.m. So just FYI, cats coming through as I give this lecture because they're used to me being tucked in bed by now. But in any event, let's get started. I'm going to share my screen with you all. So let's get through to that. Okay, does this look good? Does this show the PowerPoint? Can you see it? Barlo, is that good?
Yes, it looks real good.
All right, and you can hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, excellent. So yeah, I'm talking about, oops, hold on one second. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I'm talking about Ani Cathedral. This is a work in progress. I have a whole lot more to learn and to read, so just take that into account as I present some of these new ideas. Um, and yeah, just be aware that this is rather in the middle of a project rather than at the end of anything. I'm in the first stages of working on a book that will include Ani Cathedral, and you might think how foolish of me to want to talk about such a very famous monument. So many excellent scholars have talked about Ani Cathedral before, but I found with the frescoes that I discovered a year ago, and my ongoing work, that even the most famous, the most celebrated of monuments, we can still learn new things about them. And indeed, sometimes it's the most famous monuments that we kind of don't look at so carefully because they're so famous and we figure so it's already been done. So I'm just, I guess, you know, to the students out there who are listening, I would say, don't be afraid to study those important monuments and be curious, because you never know what you're going to find. So yeah, Ani Cathedral, if you Google it, you find it's got like 4.5 million hits. It is up there with, I would say, the top 5 monuments of Armenia that, in terms of fame. So I want to talk about Ani Cathedral in a forthcoming book project. And I want to talk about it as part of an architectural movement or tradition that arises in the late 10th, early 11th centuries in the northern kingdom of the Bagratids in Armenia. So I see Ani Cathedral in terms of its architecture, and its construction, its style, the way it's the plan, the design, related to a number of other monuments, both in Ani and outside of Ani, but in the region. So I'm sort of placing Ani here with a lot of photos and plans of other churches also built in the late 10th, early 11th centuries, to give you a sense of what I'm trying to do. That is, I'm interested in taking a few monuments and doing very close contextual work on them. So if you know my previous book, Vigilant Powers, I tried to do that for the 7th century, to look at 3 churches in sort of with a deep dive into who made them, why they were made, why they look the way they do, what their inscriptions tell us, what the architecture tells us, what the landscape tells us. So very close study of a few monuments in order to sort of build a sense of this architectural moment. So that's what I'm going to try to do also for the late 10th, early 11th centuries in the Bagratid Kingdom. And so Ani Cathedral, I see that as a kind of, as a part of that, as a kind of chapter of that study. So to that end, I'm looking at a number of themes, a number of subjects related to architecture. And I've just put some of those up there on the screen for you. I'm interested in history writing. I'm interested in liturgy, society and social roles, neighbors like Byzantium, the Abbasids. I'm interested in technology. I'm interested in how the Bagratids perceived their own past. I'm interested in the Bagratids as architectural patrons. I'm interested in poetry, like Grigor Magistros and his relation to this moment in time. I'm interested in attitudes towards images and towards material things. So all these things make me, they're part of, going to be part of my study. So it's not just about architecture. For me, it's about inscriptions, about written texts, about sculpture, wall painting, and archaeology. So and that's frankly, anytime you study an Armenian church, you're studying that's something that's more than just walls, piers, and vaults. It's often engraved with messages on the wall, or it's sculpted, or it's painted. So built into studying Armenian churches is this kind of interdisciplinary endeavor. At the same time, anybody who's visited Ani Cathedral will look at this building and think, this is a very carefully designed building. And I'm just showing you a detail of the base of one of the dome piers. And you can see this could have been a monolith. It would have, you know, a big rectangular support. It would have served the same function, but instead you have this incredibly carefully faceted geometric form that is holding up the dome. So there's tremendous interest, attention to design in the period that I want to understand better. So just to back up a little bit, we're looking at Ani, we're looking at the Bagratid Kingdom. Here's a little animation of where Ani is. In the late 10th, early 11th centuries. We're looking at the cathedral, which is in the capital city of Ani, and it's located right where the circle is. It was built, interestingly, after the city became the capital of the Bagratid. So in 961, Ani became the capital of the Bagratid Kingdom. It was built after that, and around the time of the major city walls, which you see here. So in the late 10th century. So it's part of a program of building that really speaks to the expansion of Ani in the latter 10th century. Ani is centrally located in the city, and from the various gates of the city, you see it sort of nicely centered. On the right, you see Ani as seen from the main gate, sometimes called the Lion Gate. And on the left, you see it as you are standing in what's called the checkerboard gate, which is all the way on the left of the city. I'm getting, yeah, the eastern, let me go back for a minute. Yeah, all the way over here. So that would be the eastern part of the walls. So it plays a sort of prominent role within the topography of the city. And it also is, as you can see, a large, imposing building. It would have been even more so when it had its dome intact. And I'll show you a drawing of what that might have looked like in a second. But this is a large building, 34.29 meters by Toromanyan's original measurements. So slightly larger than the Church of Mren from the 7th century, which may have formed a kind of model for Ani. And you can notice that, you know, even though Ani Cathedral is 3 centuries later, 3.5 centuries later, it uses the same format that is a domed basilica with corner chambers at the eastern end, terminating in a semicircular apse. In the case of Ani Cathedral, though, and again, this speaks to design, you can see how carefully the space is constructed to emphasize regular geometric forms. So those supports form almost like diamond shapes, faceted diamond shapes. The apse doesn't project from the eastern end, but actually is inscribed within the rectangle of the structure. So again, very carefully designed and thought out. Just a view of the outside, one of the things that makes Ani Cathedral and associated buildings so striking and unique and elegant is that exterior arcade that wraps around them. And I often talk to my students about that, the development of this kind of elegant series of arches supported on attached columns that creates a kind of webbing or a visual rhythm around the exterior facades and unites this structure. Here's another view of that arcade. So that's a very interesting feature of this new Bagratid architecture. Like so much of Ani, it's been written about in really insightful ways by other scholars. So, you know, I'm excited to be reading the wonderful scholarship of many people about this monument. And part of what comes up in the scholarship is the kind of emergence of these arcaded walls, these blind arcades. Here's just a detail I took on when the sun was hitting the monument to show you how polished the stones are. So they're not just, it's not just carefully cut or joined stones or designed, spaces, but they're polished to a high sheen so that when the sun bounces off them, you get this wonderful kind of glow. Here's that view that I wanted to show you of Ani Cathedral with potentially what its drum and dome looked like. So it would have, again, been even more prominent within the landscape. And this, unfortunately, is what the roof and the drum look like now. You can see that the roof tiles have largely disintegrated, collapsed, fallen off, leaving in its place the soft cover of the vegetation that's now growing from the roof, indicating moisture. This photo was taken at a time when we actually, a group I was with had a crane, and some brave people went up onto the roof and stood there. I decided to take a pass on that, but I let others do it. And here you can see someone very brave standing on the roof of the basilica. And you can also see here some of maybe the remains of the stone shingles that once covered this building. And then here's my friend Armen Kazarian, who has written about the arcades of Ani and associated buildings. And I caught him on the crane looking very pleased with himself. Okay, more to come. So Ani Cathedral, here are two interior shots. It maybe review for those of you who are listening, but I will discuss it anyway. That these interior spaces, the interior spaces of Ani Cathedral, are soaring spaces that are defined by vertical lines created by the profiling of piers. They're made elegant by the pointed arches that rest on those piers. Again, the overall effect is of an integrated building, kind of like a skeleton of a building, not unlike what you see, of course, in Romanesque and Gothic architecture. And of course, that comparison was made already in the 19th century, if not earlier, the comparison between Ani Cathedral and Gothic and Romanesque. And however we want to answer that question or tease out that relationship, the essential aesthetic, which is about linearity, is about verticality, and is about the kind of uniting of parts of the church from top to bottom, I think is comparable. And here's just a view of Ani Cathedral on the left and Mren on the right, where you can see how at Ani Cathedral, the interior space, this is the same view really of looking into the apse. The interior space is much taller. It is more united as a kind of vertical rising from the floor. And this is even true with the choice of using pendentives rather than squinches, as you see at Mren. So whereas at Mren, you get a sequence of kind of hooded dark spaces, at Ani Cathedral, you have this, you look into the apse and you get this sense of height and of reaching towards towards the sky. I'm gonna just rush through my frescoes a little bit because you can find those in other lectures online, but I think I'll just show a tiny bit so you have a sense of what I have already done on Ani Cathedral. So you're looking into the apse, and that's where I used software to, in a sense, uncover images in the apse. So here you see the apse with just an untouched photo, and then if you use various kinds of software, image manipulation or image modification software, you can start finding details like this wonderful ox, an angel, part of a throne. So that for me was a kind of revelation when I realized how much could be done with Ani Cathedral just by taking the photos I had already had taken from many trips, and kind of dropping them into my Adobe software and playing with various levels of light and dark, various tonalities, various ranges of colors and brightness. And what I found is that the Armenian frescoes were very, very sort of receptive to being brought out by that means. So there's much more work to be done there, but that's just a kind of a little bit about what I have already done. But again, with that too, as with what I'm going to talk about today, there's much more to be done. And then also I found I found this inscription on the right side of the apse, the southern side of the apse, which was exciting. Okay, so moving on, I want to talk about the foundation, the inscriptions at Ani Cathedral, and particularly the foundation inscription at Ani Cathedral. But before we do that, I just wanted to sort of emphasize what's important about inscriptions, and in particular, inscriptions on medieval Armenian churches. So first and foremost, they are important because they record historical data. They tell us dates, they tell us the names of patrons or rulers. They record donations, whether it's the donation of a building or it's a donation made after the construction of the building. But they also reveal all kinds of other things. They reveal political ambitions. When they're read against historical chronicles, we can learn about the historical personae that were involved in the church. We can learn about the motivations for the patrons. We can learn about relations between different individuals mentioned in an inscription. We can learn about theology and liturgy through the inscriptions and the kinds of texts, the kinds of language that they use. And they are also linguistic and literary phenomena. So they're very interesting as for what they reveal about the Armenian literary tradition. At the same time, along with all this stuff to do with words, they're also inherently visual and material. So they have to be understood as a kind of visual marker, they need to be understood as words that would have been read, maybe not read, maybe just looked at, maybe ignored, but they would have been understood as part of the building. They might have been understood in relation to nearby sculpture, for example. So they're complex, inscriptions are complex, and they can be approached from many different disciplinary vantage points. I'm an art historian, and so I'm very interested in how they shape the experience of the monument, and I'm interested in what they reveal about donation practices. So there are a lot of inscriptions on Ani Cathedral, and I just wanted to mention some of the main ones. And I've kind of highlighted them for you in this way. There are two inscriptions that date from the Byzantine occupation of Ani, and these are very interesting inscriptions that have been studied for many years now. From the 11th century, they are recording tax levies for Ani traders in the case of this one close to the door. Another one relates the restoration of walls by an Aharon Magistros, as well as the donation of water and tax levies. On the south side are more inscriptions, and there are two from the 13th century, one at the very far right, Tigran, who restores stairs and donates store and stipends and manuscript, etc., in exchange for a yearly badarak. And then another donation as well from the 13th century. But I have my red circle-y thing here on the foundation inscription, and that's what I want to focus on right now. So this is the foundation inscription, and a photo on the left and kind of where it is on the right. Let's look at it a little bit. First of all, the classic place to look at this and study it is in the Divan Hai Vimakrutyan. And so you see the inscription here as it appears on the wall, and then you see next to it the transcription. I have also tried to make a working English translation of this inscription, which you see here. And I have tried in this case to sort of keep with the line breaks of the original. So what this foundation inscription is a record of donation. And we're gonna spend a little time on this because it's kind of, I think, a crucial text for us to understand the monument. Oops. Okay, so the first thing we need to understand is that this is a donation by Katranide, who was a Bagratid queen, the queen of the Armenians, and the wife of Gagik Shahanshah. So the crucial thing that this inscription tells us is that she builds this church. And so that's number one. That's the first thing we learn. And in the second part of the inscription, we go from first person I Katranide to I Lord Sarkis. So it changes about halfway through. And now we hear from the Catholicos of the Bagratids, Lord Sarkis, who has ordered his clerics to, after the passing of the queen, to celebrate 40 masses for her until the coming of Christ. So this is the crucial thing in this donation inscription. It's given by Katranide, who names herself, and she says, we've erected this as a house of God. And then we learn that, you know, in exchange essentially for that, she has asked for these masses to be said essentially to intercede for her. And then we also have, there's another character in this foundation inscription, and that is the scribe himself. So we learn at the very end that this memorial was written by the hands of Bene. And we can even see this right here on the inscription, the very last line. So it's not unheard of for a scribe in an inscription to name himself, and we can see this at Ani even, where we have the names of scribes. But for such an important church, and in a foundation inscription, this is really, I think, striking. So keep that in mind. Second interesting thing is the dates that are present here. And if you take even a little bit of a look at this, you can see that there are many different kinds of dates. There's the Armenian era, it's the year 450. There's a Roman era, 219. And then down below, there are more eras. There's the year from creation or from Adam that's given. And then another date from the incarnation of God or from the time of Christ. And then another date from the conversion of Christ. So there are so many dates by which this foundation is sort of situating the construction of the church. And that's very interesting. And it speaks to, as far as I've got with it, it speaks to a tradition you also see in history writing of the time and in someone like Stepanos Taronetsi or Asolhik, who also is very interested in careful calculations of time. Okay, so there's something else really interesting about this foundation inscription that appears at the end of the first line, and you see it here. So this is a series of 3 letters or 3 symbols. In Armenian, it's sometimes called gutsakir or pagakir, like joined up letters or symbols. And these symbols come right after the first 2 dates. And so one of the questions scholars have asked is, what the heck does this say? And there's been a really interesting kind of tradition of literature on this subject. So I want to take you through this a little bit. So first of all, what are we talking about? So as I mentioned, these are, what we saw here are not individual Armenian letters, but letters that, or symbols that seem to combine many different letters. And this is a tradition in Armenian script. We see it in manuscripts, and we can also see it in lapidary or stone inscriptions. And I'm showing you some nice ones on the left of Tadeos and Garabed, and here's another of Garabed. But you can see how the letters combine into a single glyph. So we can do Amen. We can do something like this with the magic of PowerPoint. We can make not very nice, but a reasonable Gutsakir by combining all the letters of the word Amen. So basically, the thing that scholars have tried to do since the time of Brosset, who was a scholar in the 1860s at Ani, they've tried to figure out, well, what are we reading here? What does this say? So Brosset came up with an idea that it said, the first part said Shurchani. The second symbol was Ami, or year. And then the third was a number, or 92. For the life of me, I don't see how, I see Ami, and I see how grad and pen could be derived from the symbol, but I don't see how Shurchani can be got from that. So that just, for me, I felt like if this is a game of Armenian Scrabble, that, like that, I just did not get that. So moving on, Alishan had trouble with the first and last symbols, but thought the middle one said perhaps Amin. So again, of the year or in the year. That was his assumption as well. And that makes sense. I think that's something that is generally, there's consensus around that. Now Basmadjan in the 1930s had a very different idea. He thought the first symbol was Beni, or Penny. And he thought the second symbol was Amin. And if you put that together, it's Benyamin. And then for the last one, he thought it was Kare, which is quite clever, right? So it's saying Benjamin writes this. So he was saying that this is another sign of the scribe Bene, who now calls himself, who puts his name as Benjamin here, and that this is the scribe signing his name again. And while it actually might work not so badly with the glyphs, like if you combine the letters, it sort of looks okay. It doesn't really make sense from the point of view of the convention of inscriptions to have a scribe name himself twice in that way. So that Basmadjan's idea, Basmadjan's idea was taken up once, modified a little bit by Manucharian, but nobody else since then has really accepted this position that it's basically another signature of the scribe. Now, instead, Akinyan went in another direction. He thought that the first glyph was a number. And he agreed that the second glyph was Amin, so another year. And then he thought the third glyph, I don't know how this works. I won't even pretend to, but he thought it indicated the Hagadsiots, or the Hagarites. So in the 390th year of the Hagarites, that's what he assumed that this said. The problem, and that would be, by the way, the Islamic date of the Hijra year. So when Muhammad went to Medina, which is usually dated from 622. So if you add 622 to 390, you get 1012, which is roughly around when the cathedral was built. So Akinyan is saying basically this is an Islamic date. That's what these three glyphs say. And this was, I think, very smart because the position of these three glyphs is right after the era of the Romans. So that first line then, if we accept that it's a Hijra date, it would be the Armenian era, then it would be the Roman era, and then it would be this Islamic year. Abrahamian in the 1970s, and we're coming to the end, by the way, so don't worry about it, had the idea that, again, it was Amin, but he thought that that last word was Geper. And he thought it said basically in the 402nd year of the Geper, AD 1024. Now, Geper, which isn't a word I've found attested in Armenian elsewhere, but please help me out there if you know of it. It is could be Arabic kafir, meaning infidel, rejecter, denier. So Abrahamian thought this was, again, the Islamic era, but he interpreted that last glyph as Geper. And this has been accepted by the only other scholar I could find to write about these three glyphs, and that is Vardanyan in 2000. He had a different view of the first glyph, which he thought said 393, and so he thought this was the 393rd year of the Geper, so AD 1015. This is all really complicated. It is kind of like Armenian Scrabble, but what's happening here is that scholars are kind of increasingly accepting that this is an Islamic era date. It may be right, it may not be right. I think the jury's still out, but it would be very interesting if this were a Hijri date. And it would lead to only more questions. So why do you have this date that's included after the Armenian era and after the Roman era? And why is it written in glyphs, this Kutsakir or Pagakir versus regular script? Why not write it out? Is it trying to conceal the Islamic era date? And if so, why? Is it a negative thing, like a sign of contempt or fear or hostility or something else? What does it say about political and cultural relations between the Bagratids and Islamic communities in their midst? And what does it say about the role of the monument? These are open questions, but it's interesting to compare from almost the same time another inscription, and this is at Hakhpat Monastery. It's the sculpture of Sambat, the Bagratid king Sambat, and this is an inscription that is essentially in the turban here. This was discovered by Derevondian in 1979, and it is, believe it or not, this is an inscription, and I'm just showing you a detail here, and it was worked out by Derevondian to read Al-Malik, Shansha al-Malik of Ani. So essentially King, Shansha, king of Ani. So that if we take these two monuments together, Ani Cathedral and Hakhpat, both Bagratid foundations, maybe we're looking at similar attitudes towards the Islamic world as expressed through epigraphy, but that's already taking a few leaps, and I would like to do much more work to understand both the glyphs and the contemporary situation before I make that leap. But nonetheless, what's so interesting And by the way, this is where that inscription is. So you can't see it from the ground at Hakpat. But what's interesting here is that you have so many dates at Ani Cathedral. So you have the Armenian era, you have the era of the Romans, you have the Islamic Hijra date, you have the creation era, you have the year of the incarnation of Christ, the Christianization of Armenia, not to mention the reigns of Gagik and Sarkis. So in so many ways, this monument tells us the time. And if that weren't enough, it also had a sundial originally. It's no longer there, but you can see from old drawings like the one on the left and from notes like that of Sarkisian that there was once upon a time, right next to the foundation inscription, a large sundial. So this monument is a kind of meditation on time in so many different ways. I'm running out of time, but I want to say a few more things before I continue, if that's okay, Barlow. Are we good with me moving on a little bit?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, great. So the other thing, the last thing I'll say about the inscription that's interesting is the way the building is described. It is a house of God, and it is a new and living spiritual offspring and an everlasting monument. Again, everlasting monument, reminding us of the place of this monument in time. But the other interesting thing is this new and living spiritual offspring. Norok yev gentani, zununt pokevor yev artsan mushten chanavor. So this language of the new and living is really interesting. And it comes up in Hebrews 10:20, where, and this is the letter of Paul to the Hebrews, where Christ is described as a new and living way. That is, the incarnation of Christ is a new and living way. And it's contrasting the blood sacrifice of the pagans with this new sacrifice of Christ. So I think there's some very interesting theological language, scriptural language that's being used, that's being evoked in the foundation inscription, and not a great surprise given that it the role of the Catholicos Sarkis in the foundation. So I have like zero time, but I'm really excited about one last thing I want to show you. So with Barlow's indulgence, I want to get to it, and that is to return to the issue of design. So you're looking here at the south facade, and you're looking at that beautiful pier that we talked about before. The entire building is filled with and covered in decoration, and I'm showing you here a detail of the window, a window on the south facade with the molding, the crowning molding, and you can see the colonnettes. And if you look carefully, all of it is carefully carved with different kinds of patterns. And I'm showing you some more details here. You could spend hours, looking and identifying different patterns, but luckily Toros Toramanyan has largely done that for us. And I'm showing you here pages from his notebook that show the variety of kinds of designs that there are. And this alone is fascinating. And you can see here the kind of the geometric designs and the grid forms that adorn the cathedral. A detail of one of the niches and another detail. So I was looking at this, it's been locked down, so I haven't been able to go to Ani Cathedral at all. So I thought this summer I would sit down and just look at all my photographs, every single one of Ani Cathedral, and go stone by stone. And I was really interested in what I found right below the eagle. So this is an eagle on the south facade. And you can see there's one of those beautiful cubic capitals here. But I want you to notice this little carving down here. I'm going to show you put my purple square around it and maybe show you here. Here's me having traced what I saw. Basically, what you see are a series of interlocking circles. They don't actually extend beyond this one stone, so I wasn't sure how to, in my draw feature, to cut it off at the stone, but it does. So you have a series of interlocking circles. And that's located right up here, right below that eagle. And a scale bar, this is rough because I have not been able to measure it. I haven't, even been able to take a great photo, but it's about 20 centimeters long. Each circle is about 5 centimeters. So what the heck is going on here? What is this? Is it random graffiti by a passerby? I sincerely doubt it, given the great height of this carving, and also the fact that it is only on a single stone. As I said, it doesn't extend. Those lines don't extend to make the next circle on the next stone. So I don't think it was done in any kind of random way. And I also don't think it was done after the church was constructed. I think those carvings were made on the stone before it was set into place on the church. So perhaps in the building yard. So perhaps a fun doodle by a mason, but you'd have to define what's fun and what's a doodle for the late 10th, early 11th century. It for sure looks like it's practice or some kind of preparatory work with a compass. And you could even see the compass points. And so it could be that what we're looking at here is a rare and precious thing for medieval art and architecture, and that is preparatory work, the actual prep work that happens before you do your carving. And in that respect, it's interesting that interlocking circles are the basic design unit of the cathedral sculpture. And we can see it here again, looking at Toromanyan's designs, and then we can see it here. So right here you have those circles, and right here you have almost the same motif of these overlapping circles. So I want to stop with that, and I will just point to the fact that there's my own little drawing again, but I want to point to the fact that this takes us to a lot of scholarship on medieval graffito and the role of carving on walls for the purposes of preparing a building or designing a building. So it's exciting that we find this, and here are just some other examples. We find this on Ani Cathedral. So so just to wrap up, I think I'll say that I want to thank Barlow again for giving me a chance to share this work in progress. I think what's important to take away from all this is that even with a monument as famous as Ani Cathedral, we still have so much to kind of ponder and puzzle out and still to discover. So maybe when we can all dust off our passports, there's more work to be done at the site. So I think with that, I will conclude my presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maranci, Christina, for that presentation. Very interesting work. I mean, there's so much to be done, and you still have, I mean, it's like almost a lifetime of work, looking forward to it, right? In terms of all the things that you're going to be working on. For our attendees, if you would like to ask a question or a comment, please use the question and answer forum. So there should be a question and answer forum for you, place that you can ask some questions. And while that is starting, I have a question regarding the inscriptions, because it seemed that after the initial construction was completed, that inscriptions were added at different periods. Is that something that's commonly done, that different people or owners maybe of the church or different patrons would add?
Yes, that it is common, and what it reveals, I mean, I think as architectural historians, we usually focus only on the foundation inscriptions, but from a historical perspective, it's so interesting to look at the life of the building over time. So, for example, one thing I'm going to do with this book project is go back to Marin, even though Marin is 7th century, and therefore before this my sort of purview, to look at how in the 10th and 11th centuries it remained in use and was, remained a subject of sponsorship by people, by the community, by the Baggertids, actually. So.
Good. Okay, still waiting for some questions. There's some questions that will come up in just a moment. And the second question I wanted to ask you was, from from the last time that you visited Ani, we understand that Ani is in a sort of threatened state, right? In terms of its physical state. Do you have anything to add on that as far as anything you've been hearing from friends or people that have been able to visit as to its status?
Um, I don't have much to add, except I know work to stabilize the monument is ongoing, and there has also been archaeology at the site at the cathedral, west of the cathedral. But as far as what the latest is, I don't know. My knowledge is probably where yours is right now. So
Great.
yeah.
We have a
Yeah.
couple of questions. So some questions. First question is, when you were discussing the apps and you were talking about it being white
Yes.
and that it was so faded that you had to use the software to find the icons, was it a case that it had simply faded, or was it whitewashed because Armenia was under Arab rule or something like
Yeah.
that?
Oh,
That's kind of the question.
great questions. And I only wish I knew for sure. And I think what you would have to do, and I'm not a conservationist, that's a serious science that people do. And what you would want to do is go there, and you would want to actually find out what the heck is on the wall. So are we talking about whitewash? My guess is that's what it is, that the apse was whitewashed, and it was probably whitewashed. It could have been whitewashed as early as the Seljuk period. So when Ani was under Seljuk control, so that would be the 11th century. It could have been at another time. We don't know. So that's an area that will demand probably a team of experts, including conservationists, to figure out what exactly is going on there.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's a great question.
Another question. It's where was the sundial located? Are the at the missing section of masonry at the base of the arcade above the steps? Was that where the
It was
sundial?
located, yeah, I wish I knew for sure. And I've looked at the stones to figure out, like, is there a missing stone? And I can't for the life of me figure it out. What Sarkisian says, we're just going on, what we can know. Sarkisian says, it's close to if I'm remembering correctly, it's very close to the foundation inscription. And I think he says, I to be honest, I forget exactly what he said, but it's close to the foundation inscription, and that makes sense. So it would be obviously on the south side of the building, maybe a little bit above the foundation inscription. But now, it's shown in that old drawing I showed. It's shown sort of to the right, but I don't think we can take that as a kind of, that's how it looked on the wall. So, but yeah, I wish I knew where it was, because you look at that part of the wall now, and there are missing stones towards the bottom, and I think that's what the person was referring to. But
Okay.
that wouldn't make sense for a sundial to me, because it wouldn't really get the good light way at the bottom.
So there was a question about the comparison that you made to the medieval markings at the Mosque of Divri.
Yeah.
You have some comments on that? What are your comments on the
Yeah.
comparison?
So, are you okay? Yeah. So there was a really interesting article by a woman named Omur Bakirer on. And it was in a journal called Mukarnas, and it's called The Story of Three Graffiti. And it was about two graffiti that were at Divri that took the form of interlocking circles, and another graffito at Ani in a dwelling that was excavated. And I've been trying to dig up, she's using archaeological reports that I haven't been able to access yet. But what she was doing is making a claim that these were architectural drawings, that they were used, that the graffiti were used as a means to essentially plan out these buildings, Divri, and maybe something at Ani. But she didn't know the graffito that I was talking about today. And but it suggests a broader context for this practice, and it also puts it puts the practice back to the late 10th, early 11th century, which is interesting. So, and I think just one last thing I'll say is it speaks to the importance of design, of two-dimensional design to medieval Armenian architecture. And that's something we could also see in, I showed you briefly Mukarna's drawing as well, that was made in an Armenian monastery. So I think our graffito from Ani Cathedral belongs to a kind of robust architectural practice in the region.
Great. And there's a question that says, is the stone we see on the exterior only a facade, or does it also appear on the interior? Or were there two quote unquote walls of stone with infill?
Yeah,
So
the latter.
construction.
Yeah, the latter. So it's
core and then the
the core and then the two revetments on either side.
okay. Interesting question here. If you're thinking of a Bagratuni version along the model of the book Vigilant Powers, what two monuments would you read in conjunction with the Cathedral of Ani, and why?
It's a good one. I've been debating this and I have a long wish list, but I know that it has to include Chutkonk, which was a monastery, and now it's just a single church basically, or the single standing church in the Digor region, not too far from Ani. And then I'm thinking of Marmashen as well, because they belong to this interesting moment, and they are of a sort of comparable architectural aesthetic. But at the same time, I don't want to leave out other monuments like the Church of Gagik at Ani or Surpragich at Ani. So I'm still really struggling with that. It's an embarrassment of riches really to try to narrow it down. But ultimately, I'll try to pick three that give the sense of the breadth of the tradition and its diversity. So stay tuned.
There's a question about the interlocking circles that you were mentioning. Did you find the evidence of such circles in other medieval Armenian architecture or medieval architecture? And were there other ones, or was it just that only one that you saw at Ani, the one that you mentioned?
That's a great question. I've never looked before. I was shocked to find it. I mean, at first I thought, what, as usual, what the heck is this? And then I started to realize, oh, this could be interesting, and talk to people. But I'd never, like so much of when you find something, it was complete luck. And but I knew that I wanted to look very carefully at every stone on the building, and that's how it emerged. But before, so I think I'll be keeping my eye out now, but I haven't seen anything like that. There are such interlocking circles, and this is in Omer Bakir's article, that you see on walls in England as well. I mean, it's interesting how it's a sort of medieval phenomenon. And so she has a kind of very sort of, I don't know, global approach to the subject. But yeah, I had not seen anything like this elsewhere. And I don't think that many of us who work on Armenian architecture knew about these interlocking circles at this Ani dwelling house. So that was news to me. I mean, maybe people did, but I certainly didn't. So.
Question about Ani, as far as it being available, is it open to the public is the question. And then how long ago did you visit? When was the last time you visited?
Yeah, I whether it is open to the public right now, I mean, not right now, but like, in this pandemic moment, I'm not sure. But but it is in general. I mean, in normal times, yeah, it's
accessible, right? It was,
yeah.
It was for a while not accessible, but then actually I visited there about 5 years ago, and weren't too many tourists. One guy kind of taking money at the front, and that was about it.
yeah, the ticket booth.
Right.
Yeah, my last trip was 2016, so I was probably there around the same time that you were.
Right. A follow-up on the sundial question. The person that asked about the sundial had mentioned that it was perhaps at the base of the arcade, and the reason that was asked because that's where it's located at Horomos and at Chutkonk.
Ah, very good point.
Comparing the other monuments.
Nice.
With that.
I appreciate that.
Great. So another person says that those circular patterns seem like patterns perhaps found in the Irish or British manuscript illumination? Is there a relation?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's it's this, that's beyond my expertise, but I think
Right.
there's you know, there there's a similar interest. Maybe it's a pan medieval thing in design, in geometric ornament and design, that you could possibly explain the similarities that way. But yeah, I'm not sure. I think, I mean, then again, circles are fascinating things. So maybe that's also kind of a universal. I'm not sure. Yeah.
So lots of compliments, thanking you, and I think we can stop here because I don't see really any other new questions. But we want to thank you, Christina, for presenting this very interesting presentation as far as your insights into the work that needs to be done. We'll definitely be looking forward to your work. And for those of you that would like to review the lecture, again, it will be on the Armenian Studies Program Fresno State YouTube channel. You'll be able to look at it and review it as well. So thank you once again for joining us, everyone. Thank you again, Dr. Maranci. And our next lecture will be on Friday, September the 18th with Dr. Ohanes Kilichta, who will be talking about the conscription of Armenians into the Ottoman army after the revolution of 1908. And he's our Kazan visiting professor at Fresno State. So thank you again and good night, everyone. And we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.